Palm Sunday. Um, to all the grieving families out there, we will be continuously praying for you. Missy Lane, please keep your head up. To all the families that we've spoken to throughout this year that are still grieving and mourning, please uh, continue to keep your hand in the Lord's hand. If you will, turn with me to John 19, verse 25 through 27, and we'll be reading from the NIV. And it reads, near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, woman, here is your son. And to the disciple, here is your mother. From that time on, this disciple took her into his home. You've heard the reading of John 19, verses 25 through 27. And we'll be preaching from the title of Letting Go. Letting Go. So, many people always ask, how do you come up with what you preach? And the easiest way to explain that is I don't come up with anything. Pray, meditate, and it just happens. So God just sends me what He wants me to preach, and I just preach it. He sends me what He wants me to study, and as I'm studying, it just comes. While I am preaching, the words just come. I don't really give them a lot of thought, the words themselves, what I'm going to say. I just turn the camera on, and I've generally studied, and we just go. We don't have a script off to the side that I'm reading from. I have some basic notes, some doodlings, but usually once we really get into it, I don't. Sometimes I look over there, sometimes I don't. When we're preaching from the actual church, I always have notes, but I can't remember if I ever actually look at them. And I definitely don't have a sermon written down. So blessed to say that it just flows, and I would love to say that it's the Holy Ghost, because I can't think of any other way that it can flow the way that it does. I usually don't know how it's going to start. Definitely don't know how it's going to end. There's usually lots of things that I learned along the way that I didn't know when I started. So I find that pretty cool. So today we're going to be preaching on letting go. Um, so we've been dealing with pandemic for a while now, and we've had our downs, and now we're having somewhat of an up time because many people have been vaccinated, more people are wearing masks, so we have less people in the hospitals, less people being deathly ill, and as a whole, the country and the cities and the small towns starting to smile again. You see more people out and about, even though we're still wearing masks. We're out and about, and you would love to believe that we are happy. You would love to believe that people as a whole are happy. And as I was arising out of my bed this morning, God reminded me that a lot of people were lost during the pandemic, and even though the people that made it are happy that they made it, the people that lost loved ones are still sad. They're still grieving. They still don't know how to let go or how to move on past what happened. They have no idea. They still have thoughts. They still have dreams. They still see their loved ones in the distance. The wrong smell comes across their nose, and they can't get that person out of their mind. TV shows, a song, anything. And next thing you know, they're crying, or they're in a daze in the corner, and they don't know how to let go. And when I say let go, people go, that's so harsh. You can't let go of your loved one. Uh, in order to move on in life, you must leave the past in the past. I'm not saying let go of their memory or their legacy. I'm saying you can't dwell there so intently that you can't ever move on with your own life. There comes a point when we all have to say what happened, happened. And there's nothing at this point that I can do about it. And I have to move on. for my own mental sanity, for the people around me, for everyone. Unfortunately, and this is not being rude, life unfortunately goes on. So as I thought about that thing, as I prayed about it this morning when I woke up, God said, this is not the first time I've sent pandemic. These are not the first people that I've lost. This is not the first time that somebody dealt with the grief of losing a loved one during the pandemic. And as I was sitting on the edge of my bed this morning, I said, God, please explain. I don't remember a pandemic in the Bible. He said, Jesus was one of the first people to die during pandemic. So the definition of a pandemic is a disease or a plague that is prevalent in a country or the world. And he said, sin has been plaguing our world since the beginning of time. He said, and Jesus had to die for sin. So by definition, Jesus died from the pandemic. And I had to give a nod for that because I would have never thought about it like that in my natural, that Jesus died in midst of a pandemic. Sin has so overtook the world that God had to send his only begotten son as the vaccine, as the cure. And I won't say the cure. I'll say the vaccine because what vaccines do is they build up your immune system to the disease in hopes that when you're infected with it, you don't have the same response and you get better faster. So if I told you that Jesus was the cure to sin, that would mean that you never sin and there would never be anybody that went to hell. So that would be a lie. So I would have to say that Jesus was the vaccine for sin because once you have Jesus on the inside, it allows you to build up tolerance to sin. It allows you to build up immunity to sin, so you don't sin as much. And when you do sin, you can look at things a little different, and you can repent a little faster, and you find yourself a better person, and you don't go as far down the road the road of sin as often once you have received Jesus. So I will call him the vaccine, but the pandemic of sin took Jesus away. And as I was sitting there thinking about it, praying about it, Jesus said, and Mary lost her son in the pandemic. And the Bible really doesn't talk much about the fact that Mary lost her son in the midst of a pandemic. And I guess it's because women were not looked upon in the same way that they're looked upon today. So we really didn't have a lot to say about Mary back then. But as I read John 19, I realized that Jesus loved his mother and his mother loved him. And as she was standing there at her son's execution, watching from afar, watching as the gnats swirled around his head, watching as the sun beat down on his forehead and the sweat profusely poured off of his chin, watched as he tried to hold his body up straight so he could take breath, but strength slowly left his body, and as he slumped in, he could not raise his chest to even take breath in. So she watched her son dehydrate and suffocate in front of her due to the pandemic called sin. On Skull Mountain or Golgotha, whatever you prefer to call it, on what is now called Easter or Easter weekend, she watched her son die. Much like the pandemic today, Jesus died a lonely death. We found that COVID does not allow people to get very close to you during the dying process. You're quarantined in a room where the ventilator is so loud that you can't talk to anyone on the phone. So many machines going that you can't FaceTime. At best, all you can do is look at your loved one from afar. Oh yeah, Jesus was in a pandemic. His mother couldn't come up and even wipe the sweat off of his brow. His mother couldn't come up and give him a sip of water. All she could do was watch from afar as the one that she loved slowly died from the pandemic called sin. As she stood there with John the Beloved, the one that Jesus would, in verse 25, give his mother over to and say, please take care of my mother. And she stood there watching her son die. And she stood there watching her son go through grief and pain. And she stood there watching her son take his seemingly last breath, hoping that he was in no pain, knowing that he was, wishing that she could go up and whisper in his ear and make right all the things that had been wrong, wishing that she could just whisper one more time, baby, I love you, whispering, hoping that she could go back and kiss him on the forehead one more time. You know how it is when you're about to lose someone. You start thinking back over the years about all the things that went wrong that you wish you could right, but you just didn't have time. As she's standing there knowing that outside of a miracle, there's no way that her son's going to make it through this. Even though she has hope in her heart, the reality of what she sees says there's no way that he can make it through this. And I've seen so many families go through this during COVID. They're looking through the window at their loved one and they see all the tubes and the machines and they see that their loved one is barely alive, but holding on to hope. But the reality of what they're seeing says that there's very little chance outside of a miracle that my loved one makes it. And they begin to run through their mind all the things they wish they had said. They run back through their mind all the good times and the bad times. They run back all the times that they wish they had said, I'm sorry. They run back all the times that they had done their loved one wrong and the times their loved one had done them wrong, and they wish they had overlooked that moment and just moved on. For the ones that aren't even talking to their loved one when they go through these horrible times during pandemic, they go in and they're in tears because now that they can't talk, pandemic has brought them together and now they want to talk. But it's too late because tube is in mouth, sedation on board, and all of a sudden you can't talk. See, Mary is standing there and she's thinking about all the conversations she has had with Jesus, but wishing she had been a part of the church that he had that was following him. Wishing that she had been one of the women that were with him going from place to place. Wishing she had been there when he healed the little boy Nan. Wishing she had been there when Lazarus was raised from the dead. Wishing that she had been there all of these times, because if she had one more moment with her son, just one more moment. See, you start to replay all these things through your head as you see your loved one dying. Lord, have mercy. Don't let them die while your relationship is under duress. Don't let them die while you're in a fight. Don't let them die while you hadn't seen each other in a while. You start replaying the last time you talked and you just can't let it go. I'm sure Mary was sitting there and she's thinking about, ooh, I had a miraculous birth. And she started to smile, thinking about how God so thought of her that he placed a miraculous being inside of her without ever being touched by man. She started thinking about the night where Jesus was born, thinking about what kind of man was he going to grow up to be, thinking about what his hands were going to look like, thinking about what his hugs were going to feel like. She started thinking in the natural, even though she knew it was a supernatural being, she started thinking in the natural, what was his wedding going to be like? What was her grandbabies going to be like? Because no matter how supernatural the event, at the end of the day, we're all still human. I want y'all to hear that. It's hard to let go because at the end of the day, we're all still just humans. As she stood there watching her son die in the midst of a sinful pandemic, dying for your sins and my sins. At the end of the day, she didn't care about all of that because that was her baby staying lying up there. See, all the numbers don't mean anything when your loved one is dying of coronavirus. She started thinking about Luke 2. And she was thinking about that moment when they had gone down to Jerusalem for the Passover. And she had lost her baby. They were on their way back from Jerusalem, back home. And on the third day, they looked around and Jesus was nowhere to be found. He was somewhere around 12 years old, and she began to panic. And right now, she's having that same panic in her heart. She was thinking about how it felt to be without her baby. And she looked here and she looked down. Somebody out there knows what I'm talking about, how scary it is when you lose your loved one. When you don't know, have they been kidnapped? You don't know if something horrible has happened to them. She's thinking about, where's my baby? And she looks everywhere, and she finally makes it to the temple, and she's relieved to find out that Jesus is in the temple teaching. But as she's thinking about that day, she realizes today that there will be no relief. See, as the loved ones stand outside of ICU beds, as they stand outside of COVID units, somebody has come to the so saddened point that there'll be no relief today. There'll be no more hugs. There'll be no more kisses. All they have to hold on to is the good memories that they have of the past. And they're so afraid that if they let go, if they move on, some of those memories are going to fade in their mind, and they're never going to be able to remember their loved one the way that they did. They're unable to move forward because they're so afraid that if they move just a teeny bit out of the past, that they'll forget something. They'll forget the way their loved one smelled. They'll forget how that day looked. They'll forget how they looked in their clothes. They'll forget how they looked on Easter Sunday. They'll forget the last Christmas they had. Can't move forward because they're afraid that if they move just an inch from the past, they'll somehow not pull their loved one's memory along with them into their future. Mary standing there remembering that day. Remembering on that day how good it felt when she found her son and told him that she was so anxious when she lost him. But she was so elated that she had finally laid eyes on him again and was able to hold him one more time. But just as elated as she was that day that she could hold him one more time, she's just as depressed right now that she knows it will never happen again. So she's holding on to that memory of that day that she held him. And it's hard to move forward because if she just holds on to that memory in her head, if she just closes her eyes and pretends like Jesus isn't dying, if she pretends like this moment isn't happening, and she just enthralls herself in that moment when he was 12, if she just pretends like today is that day that she found him in the temple, she just pretends like he's not on that cross. Maybe this will never, maybe that didn't happen. See, sometimes we want to close our eyes to what's really happening. And we want to just live in the past because in the past things were better. We remember that day that we hugged our loved one. We remember that day that we cried together, that we laughed together, that we swung in the swing together. And if we can just stay right there, everything's going to be all right. We just can't let go. She was sitting there thinking about that miraculous day at that wedding in Cana when they got into a little fight. Mary wanted Jesus to turn some water into wine, and Jesus wanted to know what did that have to do with him. But being a respectful son, he made sure that there was wine for the wedding, but he needed her to understand that his powers were not meant for changing water into wine. She was thinking about all the little bitty arguments they had had down through the years and how if she could just go back, they wouldn't have any arguments. If she could just go back, every day would be sunshine because today as she looks at her son dying, she just wants to go back to that day where they argued that time, and she just want to hug him and say, baby, everything's going to be all right if she could just go back. She could just go back. She wouldn't have no fight with him over nothing. There's some of y'all out there that's thinking about if you could just go back. You wouldn't fight over who they dating. You wouldn't fight over where they went. You wouldn't fight over what they doing. You wouldn't fight over when they called you or when they didn't call you. You wouldn't fight over anything. You would just hold them. You just hug them. You just love them. And it's hard to let go because some of y'all lost people in the midst of an argument. And when you lose people in the midst of an argument, how do you move forward? How do you let go? How do you let your brain say that I did all I could do when you lost them in the midst of an argument? As she looks back at Matthew 12, when she was standing outside and she told somebody to go get Jesus, her and all his brothers and sisters wanted to talk to her for a minute, and she could hear Jesus say, my family's in here. And even though he was just trying to say that God's family is my family, as a mother that has the hurt when it feels like he's chosen somebody else over you, when he feels like he's chosen another family over his earthly family, but all of that, she'll give all of that just to hold her baby one more time. Standing there watching him die. All the people that he's done so much good for, nobody's here to help him right now. Only one person holding her, wiping her tears, but if she could just get John to go up there and take him down off the cross, that'll make everything all right. As the sky darkened, and his head hung, and the spirit left his body. His heart began to slowly beat slower and slower. As his agonal breathing began to slowly take more shallow breaths, less often. A mother and her child are interconnected in a way unlike any other thing in the world. She could feel what he felt, even though she couldn't see him because it's pitch black. She had her eyes closed and she was praying, Lord, don't take it. Lord, don't take it. Lord, if you could just give me one more day, Lord, don't take it. Just give me one more minute, Lord, don't take it. Lord, just let me make some more memories, Lord, and I'll be ready then. Lord, let me right all the wrongs that we had, Lord, don't take him. Lord, I said some things that I want to take back, Lord, don't take him. Lord, it's a hug that I didn't give that I want to give, Lord, if you will, don't take him. Lord, I want to spend just another day with him, if you will, Lord. Right now, I'm not ready to let him go. Lord, don't take him. Lord, I need some more memories that I need to make. Lord, I'm not ready yet. Don't take him. I know you've blessed me with other children, but each child has their own place in my heart. Lord, I ain't ready to let my baby go. Don't take him. Lord, I know you gave him just to take him, but Lord, I'm not ready in my natural form. Lord, don't take him. And as she slowly realizes that her prayers will not be answered today, because God's will is not always our will. And every time that I pray, God does not always give me what I prayed for. Sometimes the outcome leaves us with grief and despair. Sometimes the outcome leaves us with more questions than it does answers. A wise man once says it's better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all. Until you have family, real family, folks that you really love, you don't understand what that sentiment means. You don't understand what it means. It's better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all. See, now that I have a wife and 2 children, I never want to lose them. And I pray that I go before they go. And that's selfish of me, but it's true. But I'm so elated that God gave me just a little bit of time with them because I've never felt anything like this before. So, in order to feel something this good, when it's taken away from you, it leaves a void or a hole that can never be filled. But you have to remember that that meant that you at some point felt something so miraculous that it can never be duplicated. As Mary sat there thinking about all the good times that she had, and she reminisced with Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene as they sat there talking about all the good deeds that Jesus did and how she was a good mama and how she took good care of him. They didn't dwell on what she didn't do. They didn't dwell on the times that they got into arguments. They didn't dwell on the moments that they disagreed, because if you dwell on those things, you'll never be able to let go. You got to find the good. You got to find those times where you hugged and you embraced, and you got to remember those times where everything was okay. People dying has nothing to do with what you did or you didn't do. It was just their time. This time for Jesus' death was predestined. It was already written on the map from the time he was conceived. Had nothing to do with if Mary had him to change water into wine. Had nothing to do with if they agreed on it or didn't agree. It had nothing to do with if she followed him in his church. It had nothing to do with if she was there at the crucifixion or not. It had nothing to do with if he was born in a manger or if he was not born in a manger. It had nothing to do with these things. But we as a human being have to find a reason for why things happen so we can heap despair on ourselves for why things have happened. It happened because God said it was to happen. So for you all that have lost people seemingly too early in the midst of pandemic, for you all that have cried all night long for weeks and weeks and weeks, for you all that have cried for seemingly a year now, I want you to stop for a minute and think about the person that you loved and think about what you loved about them. If it was your child, think about what a good child you raised and all the good things that they did and the people that they helped along the way. If it was your husband or your wife, think about the time that you smiled together, the children that you had, the hugs that you shared, the just those moments where you looked across the room and you knew what they were thinking. And think about this. It was better to have loved and lost, meaning that I'm so grateful to God that you gave me the little bit of time that you did with my loved one. Sure, I agree, it was too short, but is there ever enough? If God had gave you 99 years, would it have been enough? He had gave you 110 years, would it have been enough? If he had gave you 1,000 years, would it have been enough? There's never enough when it comes to time with the one you love. So at some point, you have to thank God for the time that he's given you with your loved one. Every book has a opening line and an ending statement. When you first open the book, you have no idea what the book is about. You don't know if you're going to like it or if you're not going to like it. You read your opening statement and it gives you some idea of what the book is going to be. And then you dive in to the body of the book. As you get closer to the end of the book, you start to slow your reading because you're enjoying the book so much that you don't ever want to end. But you know at some point, you have to read that last sentence. When you get to the last sentence, you close the book. Think about how good the book was, the things that you really liked, the things that you really didn't like. You put your book on a shelf. You tell somebody about how good the book was. Every now and then you pull it out and you glance through it. But at the end of the day, for the most part, the book stays on the shelf because it allows you to read another book. So for you all that have loved and now have lost, unfortunately, you have come to the end of that book. It is time to close the book. I want you to reminisce on how good it was to read the book, how much joy the book brought you. But at some point, you must put the book on the shelf. You can take it out every now and then and look through and read your favorite passages again. But for the most part, the book has to stay on the shelf. Because if the book is not on the shelf, you will never be able to find all the other things that God still has for you in this world. So I'll be praying for you that you can let go of the past, because that's what it is now. Those are just memories and past emotions. You can't bring anybody back. And I know you're saying I'm oversimplifying it. I'm not. Take a deep breath. Pray. Talk to your loved one and say, I still love you, but I got to move on. I love you. Continue in prayer. At some point, you got to wipe your last tear and move on and let go.